Okay, so now we are going to get a little more technical. In the first part of the lecture, I was only covering the very broad idea of what in the last 200-300 years, or even more perhaps, 400 years, science has revealed to us. It has revealed to us that nature is not immutable. That thesis is finished, it's over. Some people cling on to that thesis for dear life, etc., because they think, in my view, wrongly, that that is what theology teaches them. In fact, a lot of what we learn from theology is actually formed out of the science and scientific knowledge that existed at that time. And science has already moved beyond that. Nature is not immutable, it's always changing. That is the main lesson of that particular chapter. But now we get a little more technical and we get into the details of how these changes take place. In fact, what are the general laws of change? I'm not talking about the general laws of change in nature, but the general laws of all change. Anytime anything changes, are there some laws that determine its change? Yes, there are. These laws should be applicable to nature. They should also be applicable to thought, thinking, i.e. the evolution of human thinking, i.e. the evolution of philosophy. And they should also be applicable to history, that is to politics, economics, and so on, political economy. So what could those laws be? If I were to say to you, create for me laws of change, you would probably say, sir, laws of change of what? I'm not saying of what, just laws of change that can be applied to all kinds of change, even change for you or you in your life or your family or your country, everything. General laws of change. Wow, that's not an easy task. It would take a very big mind and brain to be able to figure out laws that would be applicable in science, in nature, in all the sciences, all of nature, in history, in politics, in philosophy, everything. How would you do that? Well, that is exactly what this man did, Hegel. He came up with this idea of the laws of dialectics. And these are the three laws he talks about, which you also answered in your quiz. The unity and interpenetration of opposites is the first one. The transformation of quantity into quality is the second one. And the negation of negation is the third law of dialectics. I dumbed it down, and this is the same laws of dialectics for dummies. The first one is opposites define each other. Unity and interpenetration of opposites, my God, what a mouthful. Make it simple. Simply, opposites define each other, number one. Number second, small changes lead to big changes. So when I say quantitative changes lead to qualitative changes, that means small changes lead to big changes. Okay, and the third is called negation of negation, but it's just the cycle of life. I like to call it the cycle of life. Okay, these are just terms that I came up with. Don't use them in any exam, etc. Okay, it's just for these terms are just meant to make them easy for you to understand what the concepts are. Hegel talks about these laws as the laws of thought. In his view, thought, thinking, has its own laws. In his view, the idea, Geist, the spirit, unfolds according to its laws. And those laws of thought, of the Geist, of the spirit, of life, therefore can also be seen in nature. But they are abstract laws of thought in Hegel, because Hegel is an objective idealist. What does that mean? Two opposite things put together. It means that he believes that there is an objective world, but he believes that the objective world is moving in accordance with some idea, some spirit, some Geist that is guiding all of its actions. So he posits them as laws of thought. In the first part of Logic, he talks about the transformation of quantity into quality. In the second part of his book, Logic, he talks about the interpenetration of opposites. And he talks about negation of the negation as the fundamental law for the construction of the whole system. Marx and Engels take these very laws and they say, look here, they are not laws of thought. What are they? These are just laws of nature, and they're abstracted from nature into thought. It's not that there are laws of thought that are standing independent of the material natural world. This is how nature works. And when you think about nature, you come up with these laws. It's not that when you think about thinking, you come up with these laws. You think about nature, come up with these laws, etc. They are derived from nature, not from any ideas. Okay, so let's get into them one by one. Unity and interpenetration of opposites, which basically is like saying opposites define each other. Okay, have you seen this movie called Unbreakable? Bruce Willis is a really strong guy, except he's always pretending not to be strong because he got into an accident and he got injured, his wife got injured, and he never wants to do that. But then he's very unhappy because he's not really himself. And there's this other guy, played by Samuel L. Jackson, and he befriends this guy and says to him, you don't understand who you are. You don't know your purpose. And I'm here, I'm your friend, and I want to teach you your purpose. And your purpose is that you don't realize you're actually really, really strong. You're a hero. In fact, you're a superhero. You have superhuman strength, and your real calling in life is to save people. That's your real calling in life. And Bruce Willis begins to try and do that. And suddenly he becomes a happier person, content, and he discovers he's really, really strong. It's a wonderful movie, by the way. Do watch it. And at the end, he says to him, see, I helped you discover who you are, really. You are the hero of this whole thing. And the thing about Bruce Willis is that as soon as he touches someone, he's able to read their thoughts. That's one of his superpowers. So he says, I want to shake your hand. And this guy is he's called Mr. Glass because he's always breaking his bones all the time. He's very, very weak. He's in a wheelchair, etc. He takes off his glove and he shakes the hand of Bruce Willis. And as they shake hands, Bruce Willis discovers that all the accidents that Bruce Willis was involved in, like train crash, ek ho gaya, in which he was unhurt, had been created by this guy. In fact, he had created hundreds of accidents and killed thousands of people. And he's completely taken aback. It's like, what have you been doing? He said, I have been searching for you my whole life. Because I am Mr. Glass. I shatter and break so easily. I knew that if I am so weak, there had to be somebody who was the exact opposite of me, who was the hero, who was the strong. And I was searching my whole life to find you. Now that you exist, and I know you exist, and I found you, I know now why I exist. Whoa, it's like that's where the movie ends. You got to watch this. It's like dialectics in action. I was like, whoa, Hegel right there. That's what does he mean? He means that all the opposites define each other. Good is only defined in relation to evil. Strong is only defined in relation to weak. Courage is only defined in relation to being scared. Male is defined in relation to female. Darkness is defined in relation to light. Knowledge is defined in relation to ignorance. Conceptually, every concept you think of cannot exist without its opposite. Just like Mr. Glass cannot exist without his opposite. No concept can exist without its opposite. They contrast and create each other. One cannot exist without the other. Light cannot exist without darkness, and vice versa. This intrinsic connection is what Hegel refers to as a unity. They are united. They define each other. In that sense, they are united. Which means that they are not isolated, but mutually dependent. And moreover, they interpenetrate. Oh my God. This is Chinese philosophy in a nutshell. This is the yin and the yang. You recognize this? What is the yin and the yang? This is water, as you can see. And this is fire, as you can see. But every water has a little bit of fire inside of it. And every fire has a little bit of cool water or the moon inside of it. The opposites, they interpenetrate. Not only are they opposites of each other, but within the opposite is the opposite of that. The good guy has a little bit of evil in him. And the evil guy has a little bit of good in him. And they're constantly actually trading places. This is Chinese philosophy, classic Chinese philosophy. And you watch a really good movie. In a bad movie, the bad guy is just all bad. And in a bad movie, the good guy is all good. But in a good movie, the good guy is good, but also not all good. And the bad guy is bad, but not all bad. And that's what makes it more interesting. That's what we call not having a stereotypical cardboard, one-dimensional character, but having a fleshed out character, which is why Shakespeare and Greek tragedies are so amazing. Othello is the evil guy, but you also sympathize with Othello. Othello is a great, great warrior, and yet his jealousy gets the better of him and he becomes evil. Macbeth is not evil, and yet his wife and his ambition turn him into something evil. And yet there's some part of you which feels like, no, how can you do this, Macbeth? You were a good guy. How did you turn into this? That's what makes powerful drama. And that's what makes it really human. That's what makes a really good script, etc. So opposites interpenetrate each other, meaning that one opposite transforms into the other over time. Good becomes evil and evil becomes good. I'm reminded of another movie, which is a children's movie, but also a good one. It's called Megamind. Anybody seen it? Okay, a few people finally. In Megamind, there's two superheroes. One is a brainy guy, the other is a brawny guy. And they're fighting it out with each other all the time. And the brainy guy is the evil guy, and the brawny guy is the Superman good guy. But suddenly the brawny guy decides, I've had enough of this. I don't want to do the superhero stuff anymore. I want to be a musician and start Lal Band, etc. So he drops out. And then the brainy guy says, what do I do now? I'm the evil guy. I can't be evil anymore. So he becomes the good guy of the movie. The two things transform. And in fact, this happens all the time. In Superman, if you ever see, there's a dialogue by Marlon Brando in which he says, the son becomes the father becomes the son. As you grow older, your parents will be like your children in the sense that you will have to take care of them. They will no longer be taking care of you. So this transformation drives the dialectical process where contradictions are resolved through synthesis, leading to a higher level of understanding or reality. The opposition between freedom and necessity can lead to a synthesis that transcends both, showing how necessity can manifest through freedom. Even within you, there will be opposite drives. One drive will say, I want to do this in life. The other will say, no, that's too difficult for you, don't do that, etc. And you will always be in this flux about what your life means to you, where are you going to go, etc. And that's part of the dialectics of thought. When two questions coincide, two ideas coincide, they make you think harder and they make you grasp new things. So that's very simply the unity and interpenetration of opposites. Two things define each other, they exist because of a contrast with each other, and they interpenetrate into each other. It's not in the sense that they're constantly in conflict with each other. They're constantly vying with each other and fighting with each other. And in that fight, they also interpenetrate into each other. They're not distinguishable. They are distinguishable from each other, but they're also joined with each other in a combat, in a ladai, in a contradiction. This is where we come to the second law of dialectics. And this is quantity and quality. These two things are easy to understand. Quantity is when there are small additions in something, as a consequence of which incremental changes occur, very small incremental changes. And quality or qualitative changes is when the essence of that thing, its distinguishing characteristic, is entirely transformed. What he says is that these small incremental changes at some time or another lead to big changes. In other words, small changes, small actions can lead to big changes. How does this happen? Qualitative changes occur by small quantitative additions or even subtractions in motion or in energy, etc., or in matter. It is impossible to alter the quality of a body without addition or subtraction of matter or energy. Okay? This is what we see in nature. Let's have a look at how this works. First, some really easy examples. Qualitative, some small quantitative change. I gave you this example before. अगर मैं आपके सर से एक-एक करके बाल निकालता रहूं, एक point आएगा when there will be a qualitative change in you. Quantitative change of taking one hair out will lead to a qualitative change that you will be a tendu. ठीक है ना? Right? You will be a ganju, like this guy over here. ठीक है? Similarly, night turns into day. Small additions of light as the sun comes out, very tiny, very, very small change in light. Suddenly, after a certain point, you discover it's daytime already, or vice versa, it's nighttime. A child turns into an adult. A child continues to grow, develop cells, the cells keep changing, etc. The body keeps growing, the mind keeps developing, and what is today a child becomes tomorrow an adult, and the adult also then turns into an old person and dies. Life turns to death, and that too, through small quantitative changes. Your organs start to collapse, etc. Your cells can no longer divide in the same way, or sometimes they divide in a way which they're not supposed to divide in, and you get cancerous cells, etc., and you die out. Grains turn into heaps, etc. Put one grain. Right now they're just a few grains, and then you keep putting grains there, etc. They will become a heap. The heap can become a mountain, and so on. Small changes lead to big changes in the essence of something. Atoms, molecules, mass. Various atoms form a molecule. You put together a couple of atoms and they come into some structure, that becomes a molecule. Various molecules form a mass. The mass consists solely of molecules, but it's something essentially different from the molecules. And similarly, the molecules are made of atoms, but they are different from atoms. You can see many examples of this. The molecules has different properties from the atoms, and vice versa. When molecules are decomposed into separate atoms, the atoms have different qualities than the molecules. You know this, right? It's very basic science and so on. And all of this is happening by change in the position of those molecules and how they're coming together, of those atoms and how they're coming together. By changing their position, you can create solids, liquid, gas, and crystals, the 4 different shapes in which we find matter, right? So we know that this is the case for water. I'll cover this in a little more detail just in a bit. But he says you can take the science of dialectics and you can take dialectics, the logic of dialectics, and break up all the sciences according to the dialectics. Mechanics, for example, is just quantitative changes in the quantity of something. Speed mein change aa gaya, mass mein change aa gaya, weight mein change aa gaya, and so on. That's all that mechanics deals with. And physics, he says. In fact, when you study physics, the first part is always actually mechanics, and then you study physics. Physics and mechanics are slightly different. We don't really think of it that way, but that's the truth. Physics is the science of qualitative changes from quantitative changes. Small changes introduce big changes. That's what physics is all about. And then you have chemistry. Chemistry is just about qualitative changes. How something, basically you rearrange the same thing and it becomes something different. That's what it's all about. Let's have a look at mechanics first. What is mechanics about? Deals with motion of physical objects. That's mechanics. That's the definition of mechanics. It just deals with motion of objects. So motion is a quantitative expression, right? Speed and distance and time and vector and so on. Insofar as qualitative changes takes place here, it is determined by corresponding quantitative change, i.e. when particles turn into a heap. That's the only instance in which in mechanics quantitative changes occur that lead to qualitative changes, but that's not really what we're studying. We're basically studying motion. Now, let's look at physics. Physics deals with the change of forms of matter and energy. How energy changes from one form into another form. How mass can change into energy. How energy can change into mass. That's the subject of physics, really. And so that every change is a transformation of quantity into quality. You're changing qualities. You're changing something. E is equal to mc square. Mass changes into energy. It's changing what its essence is. Mass is no longer mass. It's now energy, etc. That's physics. Bodies are treated as chemically unalterable or indifferent. Physics looks at changes in their molecular states and changes in forms of motion and energy. In other words, physics looks at the molecule in play. That's its main focus. Example is quantity turning into quantity. Here are water molecules in solid ice. These are water molecules in liquid water. Water is H2O. This is H2O, this is H2O, this is H2O. This is steam. This is liquid water, and this is solid ice. This is the same H2O in the molecular structure of a crystal, and that's why it's ice. And that's why you can see that per space the molecules are more spread out, which is why ice floats, because it's less dense than water. Here, look at water. Water is really, really dense. The atoms, etc., are very, very close. The molecular structure is very different, and here is basically the same molecules, H2O, as steam, which are separated from each other. He says, Hegel says, the temperature of water is first of all indifferent in relation to its state as a liquid, but by increasing or decreasing the temperature of liquid water, a point is reached at which this state of cohesion alters, and water becomes transformed on the one side into steam and on the other into ice. So as you bring about a quantitative change in the heat, either you increase it, it goes into steam, or you decrease it, it goes into ice. When you increase it, the molecular structure changes. it becomes steam. When you decrease it, the molecular structure changes, it becomes a crystal, which is ice. All right, so that's an example of quantitative changes leading to qualitative changes. The same thing you can see with respect to filaments. When you pass a current through it, it will light up. But given the property of that matter, every matter will light up at a different energy level. For some metals, you pass a little bit of energy, it will light up very quickly and heat up a lot. For other metals, you have to pass a lot of energy through them and then they will light up. Again, this is an example of a quantitative change in energy passing through that, leading to a qualitative change insofar as that thing becomes incandescent. In other words, it starts to glow. We can also see change of form of energy takes place between two bodies, etc. One definite quantity of motion of one quality, that is heat, while the other gains a corresponding quantity of motion of another quality, mechanical motion, electricity, chemical decomposition, and so on. Heat changes into energy. Heat can change into motion. You can run cars like that, and you do. You can build electrical vehicles like that, and you do all the time. Therefore, all of this is an example of qualitative changes coming about because of quantitative changes. All of this, the cars that run, your phones, etc., all of this is basically made possible by physics, and it's all made possible by those forms changing from one form of energy to another form of energy, from one form of motion to another form of motion, and so on. Now let's come to chemistry. Chemistry is just about qualitative changes. We're not so much interested in quantitative changes here. What we're looking at are chemical properties. So what we want to see are how qualitative changes occur given the same chemicals, right? So you take a bunch of chemicals and you mix them up in a different way and you come up with something different. That's what chemistry is all about. Think of an equation. In an equation, both sides of the equation are the same. The chemicals in the equation don't ever change. The number of hydrogen and carbon, etc., atoms don't change. But you rearrange them in a new way, creating entirely new chemicals, etc., out of the old chemicals. That's what chemistry is all about. They combine in new molecules in different ways to create different things. Take oxygen, for example. When it is combined as O2, which is its most frequent form, it's oxygen. When three of them come together, it's ozone, which is a very different gas. It plays a very different role. It goes up into the air, etc., and forms the ozone layer, which protects us from radiation. Take N2O, which is nitrogen monoxide. That's laughing gas. You breathe that in, you start laughing, which is why all these doctors are breathing, as you can see, nitrogen oxide, and they're all laughing away, right? It's what dentists use. If you take too much of it, you'll start laughing. But the same gas, when it's N2O5, that is nitrogen pentoxide, it's a solid crystal. It completely changes. And yet both are made from nitrogen and oxygen. It's just that they've combined in different ways, and the properties of that thing are entirely different. Again, this is an example of dialectics. Here is oxygen, and this is ozone. Completely two different things, but made of the same atoms. And this is an example of dialectics. Same with all of organic chemistry. Take methane, ethane, etc. It has the formula CnH2n plus 2. You change that, you add CH4 to it. Every time you add that to it, it just completely, the whole thing changes into something completely different. Some of these things are gases, like methane, etc. Other things are solid bodies, and so on. So you keep changing the chemicals. It's the same chemicals. You keep changing how they're combined, and they become new things. You don't have to learn the chemistry. You just have to learn that the general principle he's trying to teach you, which is qualitative changes. Now, last but not least, we come to the third law of dialectics, which is the negation of negation. This I like to call the cycle of life. Everything comes back to its position, but it comes back to the position in a new way and a different way. I like to think of this as the dialectical spiral. There's a thesis and antithesis, which leads to a synthesis. The synthesis becomes a new thesis, to which there's an antithesis, which leads to a new synthesis. This synthesis looks a lot like this thesis over here, but it's a new thesis, except it looks like this one, but it's not. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. These syntheses look identical, these antitheses look identical, but they're not. They're moving forward. Let's try to understand what this is. A negation, first of all, occurs when under definite conditions a thing transforms and is no longer itself. It changes. If a child becomes an adult, we say that's a negation. Doesn't mean he's dead. It just means he's no longer a child. He's become an adult. When life is no more, we say that's a negation. It has gone away. It has become death. When day becomes night, we say it's a negation. It's no longer day. Its essential quality is gone. As night, it is transformed into its very opposite. What it was, night transforms into day. Life transforms into death. Nothingness transforms into something, and so on. But this cycle continues. It doesn't end there. In fact, the negation then in turn is negated. So take, for example, this today. Today will come to an end. Then there will be night, etc. And then there will be day again. But now this day, the next day, is different from the previous day. The day is the thesis. The night is the kind of antithesis, the negation. And then the next day comes about. It's a day, like this day. But it's not this day. It's another day. In this way, the cycle of life continues and goes forward. This can be found in nature, in history and thought. In classical metaphysical logic, you go from A to B. But what Hegel is teaching you is very important. When society transforms, when you transform, when nature transforms, it doesn't transform in a linear way. It doesn't go from A to B. It transforms in a spiral. It appears to go head over heels. That's how things move forward. Even you yourself move forward in a spiral. Here is Hegel's dialectic. Things are moving forward from A to B to D, let's say. But they won't go like this. They will go from A to B, revolution, counter-revolution, revolution, counter-revolution, revolution, counter-revolution, revolution, thesis, antithesis, thesis, antithesis. And in this process, history unfolds and moves forward in a spiral. He likes to think of development as a spiral. You are moving forward, but you're moving forward in a circle. In a sense, it's very close to Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun also talks about the cycles of history. But he only talks about cycles. He says there's a cycle, it's going like this, but the cycle is also moving forwards, like that. That's a spiral. That's how development takes place, he says. Brilliant insight in my view. Take a grain of barley. It falls on suitable soil. Then it germinates. The grain as such ceases to exist. It is negated. In its place appears the plant, which is arisen from it, the negation of the grain. The grain has become a plant. The grain is no longer a grain, so it's what? A plant, hence it's negated. This plant grows, flowers, is fertilized, and finally once more produces grains of barley. And as soon as these have ripened, the stalk dies, is in its turn negated. The stalk is now negated. But what has happened? It has created seed and grain. As a result of this negation, we have once again the original grain of barley, but not as a single unit, but 10, 20 or 30 folds. It has expanded, in fact. The dialectical circle has expanded. And that's how we see everything in life continuing in this cycle, in this spiral, in this dialectical spiral. Take an orchid, he says, and treat the seed and the plant which grows from it according to the gardener's art. We get as a result of this negation, not only more seeds, but also qualitatively improved seeds, which produce more beautiful flowers. And each repetition of this process, each fresh negation of the negation enhances this process of perfection. You are also the negation of your parents. And your children will be the negation of negation. Not only you have negated your parents, and then your grandchildren will negate you. There will be the negation of the negation. And in this process, hopefully, things will be moving forward. Your children will be more advanced than you. Hopefully. Jury's out on that. But on the whole, yes, it's true. They will be more advanced. They will continue forward and so on. We see this everywhere, everywhere. And we've studied this in class 1. The cycle of the butterfly, the cycle of life, the cycle of rain, the weather cycle, the this cycle, the that cycle, the geological cycle. Everything you can think of moves in a cycle. But it's not a cycle purely, because it never reproduces itself exactly. It reproduces itself inexactly. It changes. Every cycle of reproduction, it changes a little bit. It mutates. It moves in some direction. That's why he says it's not just a cycle, it's a spiral. Okay? Butterflies spring from the egg by the negation of the egg, pass through certain transformations until they reach sexual maturity, pair, and are in turn negated, dying as soon as the pairing process has been completed and the female has laid its numerous eggs, and so on and so forth. And in geology, the same thing is happening. Here, the earth is cooled. We're walking on the cooling of the liquid mass. But all the time from under the surface, new molten lava is coming out. In the oceans, it is coming out. And then when it comes out and it hits the water, it heats the water, it gets cooled off, and that's how the continents move apart. And the Earth's crust, new layers are being formed all the time. Molten mass of rock which issue from the interior of the Earth break through the strata and subsequently cool off. And what happens in this result? The result of this process has been a very positive one, the creation of a soil composed of the most varied chemical elements and mechanically fragmented, which makes possible the most abundant and diversified vegetation. And this has been going on for millions of years. The Earth is billions of years old, and it wasn't so cool back then. So the cycle, the lava, the cycle of the lavas turning and churning the Earth's surface, etc., was much more pronounced. Now it's like kind of slower and slower, etc. And that's very, very good. Here it is, right? Here's the lava coming out, creating new layers, etc. The continents are moving apart. New layers are coming out constantly. That's a cycle, a dialectical cycle, very much under your feet. It's happening all the time. History is the same. He says nearly all civilizations, you go back in time, they all start with the common ownership of land. But then they develop themselves and so on, and they, in the course of time, they negate that common ownership of land. And so develops private property. But private property, as it continues to develop, creates vast inequality. And in that inequality, it also creates a kind of equality. Those who are suppressed beneath, they are all equal, they all become the same. They all become equally poor. They all become, in a certain sense, not just marginalized, but equalized in poverty. And from there springs another revolution, which will bring back, he says, common property. Here is the negation of negation, the dialectical spiral, he says, that we are seeing in history. And we see it in philosophy. The old philosophers of antiquity, they were of the view that the world is dialectical. They grasped it intuitively, he says. There was no scientific basis for them to say it. They just said, you know what? Matter is always changing. The world is always changing. Everything is always changing. Change is constant. They just grasped it intuitively. But then as you got into the medieval period, you got the idea of, you developed into monotheism and into this metaphysical view of the world about studying the world statically and so on. And now, with modern materialism and modern science, you once again come full circle to the idea that nothing in this world is immutable. Nothing is static. Well, the Sufis would have said, I told you so. Jo kuch hai wo fana ho jayega. They would say, they would be very happy here because they've always been saying that nothing is permanent. That's the idea of dialectics. And all of nature has now proved it, he's saying. Philosophy maybe, it keeps moving in this spiral, etc. Rousseau में भी हमें नजर आता है. Rousseau says when we were savages, we were all equal. It was a lovely situation. It was an idyllic state. But there was a problem of perfectibility. People wanted to be better. They wanted to perfect themselves. As they got better, what was created was inequality. As the advance of civilization developed, there was new advances in inequality. Inequality continued to rise with civilization. And in fact, that's what he says. Civilization, on the one hand, is advancing, on the other hand, is retreating. It's again that dialectical spiral, right? On the one hand, you see economical development. On the other hand, inequality is getting worse and worse, etc. Both things seem to happen simultaneously in this dialectical logic that I showed you of Hegel, moving in that spiral rather than in a straight line. And now what happens with the poor? He says, this inequality becomes the cause of equality. Why? Because before the despot, all are equal. Before the ruling class, everybody is pretty much equally poor, etc. And then Rousseau says this is going to be broken down by a new social contract based on the general will, which will once again create equality. In fact, in the break we were discussing how religious philosophy itself also, theology, also talks about a dialectic. The dialectic is starting from the Garden of Eden and age of innocence, and then moving to the age of knowledge, eating from the tree of knowledge, which also brings with it all the difficulties of labor and inequality and death and strife and war and all the horrible things that we see in history. Then comes the final conflict between good and evil, where evil will be defeated. And once it is defeated, then again we will enter into a kingdom of peace. So you see that dialectic, the negation of the negation, also in religious philosophy. And many people say that is the real purpose of that entire narrative, is to teach you the dialectic of history. Isn't that fascinating? So, in other words, Hegel, you the man. Mic drop for Hegel, because the laws of dialectics, okay, he posited them as laws of thought, which is not what they are. They are just, they are how nature works. They are how history works. They are how human thought develops. But we grasp this not out of abstractly grasping some laws of thought, but by examining the actual history of humanity, by actually examining what is happening in nature, by examining what is happening in thought, etc. They are derived from the material world, because yes, the material world is guided by them, but we have extracted them not by pondering about thought in the abstract, but by pondering about nature, the nature we live in. And that itself happens through that long dialectical spiral. And this is the greatness of Hegel, he says, to have formulated for the first time in his universally valid form a general law of development of nature, of everything, the general law of change. Society, thought will always remain an act of historic importance. Mr. Hegel is in the house, mic dropped, everybody silenced, everybody's like wowed, and that is the end of my lecture for today.